Hey everyone, Nigel here, and welcome to Crime Zone. One of the most damaging things about crime is that its effects extend further than its immediate victims. Though those directly targeted undoubtedly pay the highest price, crime has a profound impact on our psychology, often leaving victims and those close to them with an increased sense of danger that in some cases never fully goes away. But perhaps most concerning are the crimes that so effectively tap into our collective nightmares that they stoke public panic, effectively making us all potential victims. Whether they're cases that speak to an existing fear in society or create an entirely new kind of fear altogether, they share a common theme of permanently altering our sense of safety, changing our behavior, our laws, and our culture. Before we take a look at some of these crimes, a couple of caveats. For this list, we are limiting our scope to North America, as we are most familiar with the specific outcomes of these crimes as they relate to culture. We also have opted not to include well-known terrorist attacks such as 9/11 or the Oklahoma City bombing. Though they certainly qualify as crimes that created public panic, we believe they likely deserve a category and perhaps even a video of their own. If you are interested in that, let us know in the comments section below and we'll consider it for a future video. While you're there, remember to subscribe and hit the bell to stay notified about our future videos. With that out of the way, here is our list of 5 crimes that caused a public panic. Though there has always been an ambient level of paranoia surrounding Halloween, the stories of razor blades and apples and poison candy handed out to random trick-or-treaters are almost exclusively the stuff of urban legends. Still, the fears about the holiday make it incredibly susceptible to instances of public panic. Perhaps the most famous example of which followed the murder of Timothy O'Brien on Halloween of 1974. While out trick-or-treating that night, Ronald Clark O'Brien gave pixie sticks containing potassium cyanide to a total of 5 children, 2 of whom were his son Timothy and his daughter Elizabeth. Though 4 of the children didn't eat the candy that night, Timothy O'Brien wasn't so lucky, succumbing to the poison pixie stick less than an hour after consuming its contents. Police investigation revealed the motive behind the cold-blooded murder was the money from several life insurance policies O'Brien had recently taken out on both of his children. Money he needed to settle his more than $100,000 in debt. Though the details of the case clearly don't align with the folklore tales of random maniacs poisoning trick-or-treaters, it didn't stop thousands of frightened parents from permanently rethinking their child's participation in the holiday. In the coming years, neighborhood Halloween parties and supervised community events would become popular substitutes for kids going door to door, primarily driven by a fear for children's safety. The panic was further fed by the news media, which has even been known to occasionally print urban legends about tainted Halloween candy as fact. Though we can't necessarily blame concerned parents for wanting to protect their children, to this day there has never been a confirmed case of a child dying from poisoned Halloween candy given to them by a stranger. In late 1982, a series of mysterious deaths began occurring in and around the Chicago area. Over just a few days, a total of 7 people died, and it was quickly discovered that all of them had ingested Tylenol shortly before their deaths, some of them from the same bottle. Once tests revealed the presence of cyanide in these bottles, police suspected they were dealing with a case of product tampering, though were quickly able to rule out manufacturers. Because the bottles came from different pharmaceutical companies and the deaths were concentrated in a single geographic area, police concluded they were most likely looking for a single culprit. Alarmingly, this suggested that a lone perpetrator was able to add cyanide to the Tylenol capsules and return them to store shelves completely undetected, probably over a period of weeks before ever being noticed. And still more contaminated bottles were being discovered. The reaction was understandably one of panic, with warnings issued by the media and loudspeaker patrols within the city to discontinue the use of Tylenol products. Tylenol's parent company, Johnson & Johnson, also issued a nationwide recall of Tylenol products, estimated to be in the range of $100 million in retail value. Though a man named James William Lewis appeared to be the person behind the poisonings, after sending a letter of extortion to Johnson & Johnson demanding $1 million for an end to the crimes, investigators were never able to link him to anything beyond the sending of the letter. In the aftermath of the Tylenol attacks, there were hundreds of copycat crimes involving Tylenol and other medications in the United States, though none killed as many as the case in Chicago. Perhaps even more dark is the fact that copycat crimes are extremely common in cases of product tampering and poisoning, adding to a sense of panic and vulnerability among the public. The murders prompted various improvements to tamper-resistant packaging in the pharmaceutical, food, and consumer product industries, and is responsible for the widespread use of heat seals on many of these products. They were also responsible for the 1983 Tylenol bill that made product tampering a federal crime. To this day, no one has ever been charged with the Chicago Tylenol murders. While there are sadly a number of high-profile child abduction and murder cases that have become the subject of international attention over the years, it's hard to find one more consequential than that of Adam Walsh. Before Madeleine McCann, Amber Hagerman, and JonBenet Ramsey, the story of Adam Walsh became synonymous with parental fears about child abduction all over America. On the afternoon of July 27, 1981, Adam was abducted while at Florida's Hollywood Mall with his mother. He had disappeared after being left in the Sears toy department while his mother shopped elsewhere in the store. After a 90-minute search of the mall failed to find Adam, the police were called and an investigation began. Though his parents John and Reve hoped for the best, Adam's partial remains were tragically discovered 2 weeks later in a drainage canal, almost 130 miles away from the mall where he had been kidnapped. A prolonged investigation into the crime, as well as the tireless advocacy of Adam's parents, ensured that the story received sustained national attention. The publicity of the case was further amplified by the television movie Adam that premiered in 1983 and garnered 38 million viewers during its first broadcast, as well as later John Walsh's career as the host of America's Most Wanted. While the positive impacts of the Walsh's advocacy is undeniable, responsible in part for the creation of several important U.S. child protection laws, as well as the Code Adam program widely adopted in the retail sector, the broad psychological effects of the case are more nuanced. The intense focus on Adam's murder caused a lasting nationwide panic over stranger abductions, one that experts say is largely out of proportion with their actual numbers. This panic extended even to institutions like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, whose early numbers concerning child abductions by strangers were shown to be wildly inaccurate. Despite later rolling back their estimates by upwards of 80%, the initial reports were what persisted in the public consciousness, creating a sense of fear that remains to this day. Though we chose to exclude terrorist attacks like 9/11 from this list, we felt that the 2001 Anthrax attacks qualified as an important exception. The attacks are interesting because though they were never conclusively proven to have political motivations, something considered a crucial part of the terrorism definition, their aftermath was largely a result of the decision to treat them as terrorism. While the FBI theorizes the attacks were one scientist's attempt to save his failing anthrax vaccine program by stoking fear about bioweapons, their primary suspect, Bruce Edward Ivins, would ultimately commit suicide before ever being charged. The case is also unique for how it exploited an already fearful climate to cause even more widespread panic. On September 18, 2001, letters containing toxic anthrax spores were mailed to several news media outlets, and later 2 U.S. senators. The letters also contained cryptic anti-American messages referencing the attacks on the World Trade Center from just a week before. The anthrax letters ultimately killed 5 people and infected 17 others, becoming one of the largest and most complex investigations in U.S. history. Somewhat understandably given both the timing of the attacks and the contents of the letters, the Bush administration heavily favored theories that attributed them to Al-Qaeda and later Iraq, the latter being among the many spurious reasons given as proof of Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction. Though the FBI maintains that Ivins acted alone, conspiracy theories, especially those promoting U.S. government involvement in 9/11, continue, with some insisting that the 2 senators who received the letters were specifically targeted in order to stop them from investigating such theories. Much like the Tylenol murders, the anthrax attacks inspired several copycat crimes, though thankfully these were generally non-lethal due to bioweapons like anthrax being rather hard to come by outside of a highly regulated laboratory setting. The satanic ritual abuse panic of the 1980s and 90s is perhaps the most iconic example of a moral panic in all of Western society. Unlike all of the other panics involving children on this list, however, the true victims in these cases were arguably the dozens of people falsely convicted through a combination of bad science, media hype, and overeager law enforcement. Though there were several contributing factors said to have set the stage for Satanic Panic, including some of the previous crimes on this list, as well as the broad cultural backlash against the mainstream from Christian fundamentalist groups, its official start is usually traced back to the Kern County child abuse cases that began in the early 1980s, specifically the case of Alvin and Debbie McEwen. In 1982, Alvin and Debbie's daughters were removed from their custody after the girls' step-grandmother, Mary Ann Barber, alleged that the parents weren't taking proper care of them. Barber then coached the girls into further accusing their parents of sexual abuse, claiming they had been forced to participate in a satanic sex ring. When Alvin and Debbie attempted to prove their innocence, using their friends Scott and Brenda Niffen as character witnesses, they too were accused of being involved in the sex ring, which caused the situation to spiral further out of control. Despite no hard evidence in the case, local law enforcement was convinced that they were dealing with a legitimate case of satanic ritual abuse. They were also convinced that this was only the tip of the iceberg. Led by now notorious District Attorney Ed Jagels, Kern County would continue not only to prosecute dozens of people in connection with these alleged satanic sex rings, they would secure at least 36 convictions in just a few short years. Among those convicted were the McEwens and the Niffens, serving jail sentences from 1984 to 1996 before their convictions, as well as almost all the others in Kern County ritual abuse cases, were eventually overturned. In the meantime, however, stories of satanic ritual abuse had spread like wildfire across the United States, and by the 1990s had gone completely international. As a result of the hysteria that began in Kern County, several other very famous cases received major media attention and landmark convictions, such as the McMartin preschool case, which shifted the focus of ritual abuse allegations to daycare centers all across North America. Like in Kern County, almost all of these cases would later lead to overturned convictions due to the widely discredited methods law enforcement and mental health professionals used to elicit the children's accusations of sexual abuse. Indeed, many of the children who made ritual abuse allegations have come out publicly in the years since these trials to say that they were heavily influenced and coached by investigators to claim that they had been sexually abused. In some cases, they have even testified on behalf of those they formerly accused, saying they knew the allegations were false at the time, but that under persistent questioning and pressure, they simply told interviewers what they wanted to hear. Though it is easy to judge the actions of police and psychologists that escalated Satanic Panic in hindsight, it's important to understand just how influential the information regarding the link between satanic rituals and child abuse was at the time. The idea of recovering repressed memories through techniques like hypnosis was growing significantly in popularity, though its standards for therapeutic use were far less rigorous and well understood than they are today. Adding to the conviction behind the credibility of ritual abuse allegations was the now widely debunked memoir Michelle Remembers, written by a psychologist and used as a training tool in seminars on how to spot satanic ritual abuse. Tragically, the legacy of Satanic Panic is still very much alive today, not only in the handful of people still serving jail time in connection with these spurious charges, but also the many contemporary conspiracy theories like Pizzagate that draw their inspiration from the same underlying narrative. That brings us to the end of our list. What crime do you think was responsible for causing the biggest public panic? Also, don't forget to subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this, making sure to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest videos. Thank you for watching.